Hello everyone, today is August 30th. My name is Parasaran Rangarajan. I am the Editor-in-Chief for the International Law Journal of London, and we have the extreme honor of being with the Ambassador of the State of Palestine, His Excellency Mr. Riyad Mansour, and we will be going over some of the developments in the region as well as in relation to international law relations, as well as his personal opinion on some of the issues. Thank you for being with us, sir, today. How are you?
You're welcome. I'm good. Thank you. Welcome to New York.
Thank you very much. And there's lots of things going on currently, and this is a long-standing issue in the United Nations. So one of our first questions is, we'll go over the recent history of this. Palestine was admitted as a UN observer state last year, and how will this statehood assist towards establishing freedom on the ground? Because many people feel that resolutions are, being passed at the United Nations, and nothing is, happening on the ground. And the second part of our question is, does Palestine, since it's now a state, does it plan on prosecuting Israeli leaders for crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, etc.?
Initially, I would say that it is not accurate to say that resolutions at the United Nations, do not affect reality on the ground. At the United Nations, we legislate things that are very important to the national rights of the Palestinian people. And this legislation, which becomes part of international law, since we are the parliament of the globe, contribute in its own way to all other elements, especially the struggle of the Palestinian people in the ground and the pressure from the international community to eventually address the issue of justice for the Palestinian people, which means that the occupation that took place on 4th of June of 1967, when Israel occupied the land of the State of Palestine, that occupation will be terminated and the independence of the State of Palestine will take place. So therefore, what we do is a contribution to that process. In November 29, 2012, when the international community in essence recognized the State of Palestine and refuted the argument of Israel, the occupying power, that the State of Palestine doesn't exist, in the point of view of the international community, no, it exists, and it extended a recognition to that state by a voting of 138 versus 9 countries that voted against. Now, the relationship between the occupying power, Israel, and the Palestinian people entered into a new stage. It is a relationship between an occupying power and a state that its land is under occupation. And from a legal point of view and political point of view, this is a significant transformation from what Israel claimed that it is a contested land to entering a relationship of one state, although it's a member state of the United Nations, occupying the land of another state which has been recognized by the General Assembly but not yet granted full membership. That's a significant development. Now, also in terms of practical thing, this resolution opens doors for us to improve the way we defend our people and our cause politically, diplomatically, and legally in such a way that was not available to us before the 29th of November of 2012. Among these possibilities that now are available to us without ambiguity is to become a state party to the Rome Statute and joining the ICC and allowing us to do many things that we were not allowed to do before November 29th.
Okay. So you feel that it would change the situation drastically?
Well, I think it is changing the situation. The fact that Israel and a significant, important political force, country, that opposed us vehemently before the adoption of that resolution is a testimony to the fact that something important that would allow for doing certain things that we were not allowed to do before November 29th is a testimony to the fact that something important happened on November 29th, 2012.
I recently spoke with the UN Special Rapporteur Richard Falk on similar Palestinian issues, and he conveyed that there's no scope for a UN peacekeeping mission which might drastically change the situation. What do you feel about that?
UN mission, what do you mean, like, peace force?
A peace force, such as the ones being deployed in Sudan and other.
And the one in South Lebanon.
South Lebanon.
Well, I don't think that it is accurate to say that it will happen or it will not happen. These things will eventually emerge if there is serious progress in the direction of negotiation to find a peace treaty between the two countries, between the state of Palestine and the state of Israel. If things to move in that direction, then it is very conceivable that there might be an agreement on a role for UN peacekeeping, contingent, because Israel and Lebanon have it. Israel and Syria also have that. And from 1949, when there was an agreement between Israel and the adjacent Arab countries on the armistice line, Israel agreed for UN observer forces to be stationed in all these locations, and then there are 300 strong UN observers who were supposed to observe the borders between Jordan and Israel are still stationed in Jerusalem until this moment, and the UNDOF, and they renew their mandate every time their mandate comes up for renewal.
Right.
So therefore, in principle, that concept has been in place in the past, but it is a kind of speculation to say it will happen or it will not happen. We are not there yet, and if things to move in a positive direction, then this idea could be utilized if the two sides agree to that kind of force to be established. Of course, there's another model, the force that has been put in place in the Sinai after the Camp David agreement between Egypt and Israel. And most of that force is composed of American soldiers. It's about 7,000 soldiers. 5,500 of them are US forces, and there are others from European and Australia. So this is also another model that if the two sides agree to having a force to be stationed between us and Israel once we have a peace treaty, in order to secure that the two sides to feel comfortable in having such a force to observe the lines between us and them, to observe our borders and their borders. So that is also another model that could be utilized.
Okay. And regarding that subject of the peacekeeping mission suggested by Richard Falk, the scope for it, he has drawn recent criticism in the news recently as even labeled as a self-hating Jew and many things like that. Do you have any message for the Jewish community which supports the Palestinian cause?
Well, let me just also add with regard to some of the ideas that Richard Falk, who is in the business of reporting on the status of human rights of the Palestinian people who live under the occupation. Of course, he is dwelling on the concept of providing protection for the civilian population, and this idea of having a UN force in order to guarantee the protection of the civilian population comes up within that context. It is not within the context of a peace treaty and the separation of the two sides and the demarcation of borders. Mm-hmm. And we always say that since Israel, the occupying power, refusing to abide by the provisions of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which regulates the relationship between the occupying power and the people who live under occupation. And since Israel is forfeiting its obligation under the provisions of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and they are the source of lack of protection for the civilian population instead of providing them with protection, then we often ask for an international protection and that the UN to come and deploy forces there in order to guarantee the security and safety of the civilian population under occupation until we succeed in terminating occupation and having the independence of our state. Now, with regard to how he is characterized by different people, this is, I'm sure that Mr. Richard Falk is capable enough in defending himself and addressing that issues. It's not appropriate for me to pretend to be his lawyers. He is an international lawyer and well-known professor. He is capable of defending himself, and his record stands, for itself in terms of his fights for noble causes. We appreciate his work as a special rapporteur, and he is not representing himself as a person, expressing an opinion here and there. He has been selected by the international community, by the Council on Human Rights, to act in a congruent way with the mandate extended to him through the position of being the special rapporteur. So therefore, those who attack him, in essence, they are attacking the international community that put trust on him to fulfill the mandate that the international community wants him to fulfill with regard to the Palestinian civilian population and their human rights living under occupation.
And you feel this is the same way for other Jewish supporters of Palestine as well?
Well, there are many Jewish and non-Jewish supporters of Palestine. Our cause is a just cause, and anyone who has, a high level of conscience in terms of supporting just causes would definitely support the just cause of the Palestinian people. Occupation cannot be defended by any just-minded person. Occupation has to be terminated. Occupation by its nature is temporary and it has to be terminated. No one people should be dominating another people for a long period of time.
Right.
And we have been under occupation for more than 45 years, the longest occupation in temporary history, and it has to be terminated.
Right.
Currently, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is in Palestine negotiating a peace deal, which they have said, might take up to 9 months or a year, perhaps, to finalize. What do you think of that, the prospects for a peace deal? And at the same time, Israeli Prime Minister Mr. Netanyahu has said that any peace deal will be put to a referendum by the people of Israel. So do you think that this would help bring a long-standing peace or to the situation?
Well, Secretary of State Kerry today is in Washington, D.C., and he's very busy with another issue in our region related to Syria. But he put tremendous amount of effort through his 5 visits
Right.
to our region, visiting us and visiting the Israeli side and other countries in the region in order to revive the political process. And he succeeded in bringing the two parties to begin negotiating final status issues, starting with borders and security. And there is a window of time of between 6 to 9 months in order to conclude that exercise. We appreciate the effort of Secretary of State Kerry, as well as all other partners and those who helped in trying, to create an atmosphere conducive for the resumption of the political process, including the Arab Follow-up Ministerial Committee, the Quartet, the United Nations, and so on and so forth. So we appreciate the effort of all these parties in order to bring the two sides to a meaningful political process. But for a meaningful political process to take off and to possibly reach its objectives within 6 to 9 months, Israel has to abide by the provisions of international law, and they have to stop violating the law, particularly with regard, to the illegal activities of building settlements. It doesn't make sense to negotiate while they are taking our land, building settlements and expanding settlements. Right. That doesn't give them incentive to negotiate with us the termination of that occupation. And also to abide by the global consensus that Israel is an occupying power that occupied all the areas, including the land of the State of Palestine, on the 4th of June of 1967. So therefore, when we negotiate borders, we negotiate on the basis of starting on the 4th of June of 1967. If they continue to refuse to abide by these obligations, then they will not be helping all those who are trying to have a meaningful political process. From our side, we are negotiating in good faith. We are trying our best to have serious negotiation with the Israeli sides and determining, the details of the border, accepting the principle of minor adjustments of borders, and all other final status issues related to Jerusalem, refugees, settlements, water, security, etc. Now, if we reach a point of reaching an agreement through negotiation, we know that Prime Minister Netanyahu said he wants to put it to a referendum. It's the same thing with us. Mm-hmm. If we reach a deal with the Israeli side, we want to put it to a referendum, and we want to see the position of the Palestinian people. Mm-hmm. If the Palestinian people from our side endorse the agreement, then we will pursue its implementation. If the majority of the Palestinian people have different opinion, then most likely we will have new elections, and whatever government that will be put in place will be reflecting the position of the Palestinian people. I take it that the Israeli side would do the same thing. Mm-hmm. But I can assure you that the general mood among the Palestinian people and the Israeli population, that majority exists in both sides for having a peace treaty and hope and supporting the two-state solution. And I hope that we succeed in the negotiation to reach such an agreement, and after that to have endorsement from the people of the State of Palestine and to the Israeli people, so that agreement to be implemented.
So expanding on that, what is the exact relationship today between Hamas and other Gaza factions, which have been labeled foreign terrorist organizations by the U.S. and other Western nations in Europe? I'm aware they're making efforts to remove themselves from this list. I think France, they were in negotiations some time ago. So what is the exact relationship between them and the PLO? There were news reports at one time that they joined the PLO. So,
well, you see that our Palestinian movement, since its inception in the 60s, that formed the Palestine Liberation Organization, is a movement accepting different political parties from different persuasion, from the left, from the right, from the center. Hamas, which is a continuation of the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, which existed, for a long time, was not part of the PLO, but established itself as a resistant group, like other resistant groups within the PLO, and by the name of Hamas. And we engaged with them in negotiations over the years in order to join the PLO, because the PLO is the sole and legitimate representative of all the Palestinian people. It is the party that speaks on behalf of everyone. And we reached agreement with them in more than one occasions, in meetings during the last few years. And also we reached an agreement with them in Cairo about 2 years ago, and also another agreement in Doha, Qatar, to put an end to this split between the two parts of our homeland, the southern part and the northern part, and to resolve our differences in a peaceful political way, either through dialogue or through elections. And we hope that we can implement these agreements, in which all parties, including Hamas, signed on these agreements, so that we can put an end to this split that exists among us, which is counter to the interest of the Palestinian people. Now, the United States and the Europeans over the years characterized many of the Palestinian groups the way they did, labeling them this way or that way, including Hamas. We believe that these labels are not appropriate, and they have to deal with us in the same manner as they deal with the Israeli side. In Israel, there are groups that are to the extreme left, to the extreme right, and in between, and we, in the Palestinian experience, are similar to them. But if they want to deal with us officially, there is the leadership of the PLO, which handles the file of negotiations, and there is the leadership of the Palestinian people and the state of Palestine and the government of the state of Palestine, which all countries that have recognized the state of Palestine deal with them as such. One party here or one party there, and their political platform, that is the political platform of that political party. It is not necessarily the position or the official position of the government or the leadership of the PLO. It's in the same manner as in Israel. When we deal with Israel, we deal with the government of Israel, which was elected through processes by the Israeli people. We don't necessarily deal with this political party or that political parties, and they have parties in Israel that have abhorrent platforms advocating the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. Some of them even advocate assassination of our leaders, including President Abbas, and even expelling individuals and killing children and so on and so forth. So we don't put conditions on dealing with Israel based on these parties to change their political platform. Of course, if they change their political platform to a reasonable political platform, that would be desirable. But we don't put that as a condition, especially if they are not representing the official position of the government, and we expect that others to deal with the Palestinian experience in the same manner.
Okay. Currently, full UN membership for the state of Palestine is being blocked by a U.S. veto. None of the other Security Council members are opposed to this, to my knowledge. What do you think the prospects are for invoking UN Resolution 377, the Uniting for Peace resolution, which will bypass a U.S. veto? Do you think that will bring any additional leverage?
Well, I think that this argument is an old argument, and it does not stand in legal consideration, because in the history of membership of states during the Cold War period, many countries applied for membership to the United Nations, and they were not, did not prevail in the Security Council for the fact that either the Soviet Union casted a veto for political reasons or the United States casted a veto for political reasons. And that's why many countries went and joined the agencies in order to be able to join international organizations, because in the agencies vetoes do not exist. It's either majority vote or two-third vote. And we followed the same path when we joined UNESCO before submitting our application for membership at the United Nations and before November 29, 2012.
Right.
And for those who push the argument that if a veto on the issue of membership to be casted for political reasons, not legal reasons, and to go to the General Assembly, whether under United for Peace, or to have two-third majority in the General Assembly granting you recognition and membership. And by the way, 138 versus 9 is more than two-third majority in our case. Even 138 is more than two-third majority of the total membership, not those who are present and voting. But this argument was advanced by a certain number of countries in the late 40s. And they asked the ICJ a question, in essence, to allow the General Assembly to override a veto on the issue of membership by the Security Council and therefore grant membership in the General Assembly. And the ICJ in 1950 ruled in that issue by 12-2 that there is no way that for any state to become a member of the United Nations without a recommendation from the Security Council through a resolution stating to recommend membership of the said state, and for the General Assembly to vote on that recommendation by two-third majority of those who are present and voting. Therefore, this issue, I thought, people stopped, discussing it, although every now and then somebody might bring it back again to discussion. But as well as I do that the law it has two components to it. It's the statutes and the customary law.
Yeah.
In this case, the customary law and also the statute in the UN system, that there hasn't been a single country that acquired membership of the 193 countries other than the process that has been stated and stipulated in the Charter of the UN and approved by the ICJ in an advisory opinion. So the 193 countries, all of them received recommendation from the Security Council and endorsement in the General Assembly. I wish it is the case, but people who think in terms of the role between the executive branch and the legislative branch in government, that sometimes the executive branch might veto the legislative branch proposals of a law, and then when it goes back to the legislative branch, they override the veto of the executive branch. In this case at the UN, that is not possible. There is a role for the Security Council, and there is a role for the General Assembly, and in fact there is a role for the SG, because he has to receive the application. And the ICJ also, in a separate advisory opinion, explained the steps in which the Secretary General would accept application of states. So when the SG, based on his verification of the application, makes the determination that this is a legitimate application, would pass it to the Security Council for consideration. In our case, we passed that, because within 1 hour from submitting our application to the SG, he passed it to the Security Council. He will not pass it to the Security Council if the SG and his legal team in the legal department come to the conclusion that we don't qualify as a state. And therefore, we passed step one. We are stuck in step two in the Security Council for political reasons,
Right.
not for reasons on the merit that whether we are a state or not, because we are a state. And it happened with dozens of countries. If one to review the history of the UN in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s and the 70s, China did not join the UN until the early 70s, until Taiwan was removed from the UN. The two Koreas waited for 40 some years before a compromise was reached in the 90s for them both to be admitted as members. Dozens of countries in the 40s and the 50s waited for 5-6 years for the atmosphere to be appropriate in the Security Council in order to recommend their admission, including Italy, Finland, Jordan, Ireland, just only to name a few. So therefore, this issue, we studied it thoroughly, and we came to the conclusion that the UN pronounced itself, especially the ICJ, in clear advisory opinions on the case of a number of countries, and Argentina in 49 argued very brilliantly in favor of the General Assembly to override the Security Council on the issue of admission. But unfortunately, the ICJ ruled 12-2 that is not possible. There is a role for the Security Council and a role for the GA, and both need to be involved in the admission process.
Okay. And as you mentioned, Professor Francis Boyle is a long-standing friend of Palestine, and was one of the architects of the Declaration of Independence. And he's currently working for several organizations around the world, and I'm also working with organizations such as the Prime Minister's Office for the Transnational Government of Tamil Elam. It's people who have been subjected to similar type of genocide, oppression by the state of Sri Lanka. Does Palestine support the right to self-determination, the right to, under international law, for people who have been subjected to similar conditions in context of the Tamils in Sri Lanka?
You see, the right of self-determination is a right enshrined, in the Charter of the United Nations. It's a universal right, and that you cannot be a member of the UN without accepting, the principles contained in the Charter of the UN, and this is one of the key principles. For us, one of the 16 resolutions that we adopt every year in the General Assembly is a resolution supporting the right of self-determination for the Palestinian people. In fact, we reached at one time, a year or 2 years ago, 182 countries out of 193 voted in favor of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. And the foreign policy of the United States of America since the time of President Wilson, almost 100 years ago, was predicated on the principle of self-determination and supporting it. So it's a universal principle. Having said that, it is our general universal, sentiment is, of course, supporting rights of people to self-determination, but the details of the implementation is not for us or for other peoples of how, this right is being exercised in this place or that place. We have full confidence in all peoples and their capabilities of defending their rights and accomplishing their objectives.
I think you went over this, but in the immediate future, do you think there's a scope for a UN peacekeeping force, or do you think Palestine will approach the International Criminal Court by ratifying the Rome Statute? It has already been to the International Criminal Court before, but now it is able to formally ratify the statute.
It is our right, to join agencies, to become party to so many conventions and instruments, including Rome Statute and the ICC, International Criminal Court. But of course, we deal with all these issues based on thorough analysis and considerations. We are now fully engaged in this exercise of negotiation. We are trying to give peace a chance. We hope we can prevail. And we hope that Israel to behave in such a way that is in line with the international norms and the international law and conventions. Of course, those who committed, crimes against humanity and war crimes, all of us, we support the principle of accountability. Nobody should be above the law, and there will be appropriate time for all these things of dealing with finalizing all claims and providing justice to everyone, especially to the victims of these crimes committed against them. And there are many of these crimes committed against our people, including the crimes committed during the aggression against our people in the Gaza Strip. But as I said, while November 29, 2012 opened so many doors for us, including this legal option, there will be appropriate time when these options to be utilized without trying to create additional obstacles in the path of a meaningful political process. But there is always the appropriate time for doing things in the future.
And what can we expect on the ground changes from the ICC?
Well, as the ICC, as well as I do, that if you are unwilling and unable to allow domestic law to provide justice for people in your country, then the ICC could come into play.
Right.
For us, when aggression was committed against our people by another country, in this case Israel, the occupying power, then we are unable to have justice for those victims, and that's why ICC comes into play. The discussion between us and the ICC over the years in the past is whether Palestine qualifies to ask for jurisdiction of the ICC over our land. After November 29th, this issue became, an obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
So that, yes, if we are allowed to join the Rome Statute, and we can ask the ICC to have jurisdiction and to come and investigate crimes committed in our land, which we cannot investigate because these crimes are committed by an aggression by a country that is adjacent to us, and yet it is not also a member of the ICC. Now, as I said, all these possibilities are available to us now, and that is, again, to the first question that you asked about resolutions are just only ink on a piece of paper, or do they help changing reality on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
In the case of this resolution, November 29, 2012, definitely it is a very potent resolution that can help us to change so many things on the ground. Not only in the legal field, but even, like if you become, as we did, a full member of UNESCO, then, you can register your sites in the, in the enlistment of treasures of humanity.
Right.
We are a state, and these very important places to humanity are in our country, and then therefore it is our right and duty to go and register them as treasures of humanity. That's another example.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if we join other agencies, we would be able, to benefit our people in a significant way. For example, if you become part of the WHO, FAO, many of the other agencies that do provide technical assistance and economic assistance and so many other assistance to the people, which some of these things are available to us, but as you become a full member of these agencies, then you can enhance their help and assistance to your people and to your country.
Could you expand on the ties we have between India and Palestine, which go back since the days of Gandhi, and even our current government today in India? It's a cornerstone of our foreign policy to support the freedom of Palestine.
Well, we had always a historical relationship between Palestine and India from almost the beginning of time of the establishment of the non-aligned movement, and also in terms of the relationship between our historic leadership, especially during the time of Chairman Yasser Arafat and the many well-known historic leaders of India. And the Indian relationship with Palestine is not only restricted to the diplomatic support, but it extends beyond that into the so many areas of technical and concrete support. And India is part of a group of emerging economies by the name of IPSA, and IPSA has many programs of helping countries, including the state of Palestine, in many fields, developmental fields and cultural fields and youth and sports. And we are at the receiving end from these countries, in which India is one of the key players of IPSA in supporting and helping the Palestinian people. Now, when we declared our independence of the state of Palestine in 1988, India was the first or among the first countries that recognized the state and established diplomatic relationship with the state at the level of embassies. And of course we have thousands of Palestinian men and women that went to India and received education, many of them scholarships from the government, and who are important cadres in building the institutions of our state.
Do you have any specific message you would like to deliver to your viewers, readers, listeners, in terms of where we go from the future from here?
Well, two things. For your general audience, we believe that this last place of colonialism and occupation, we seek the help of everyone in order to help us to reach the moment of ending this occupation and having the independence of the state of Palestine as a manifestation of exercising our right to self-determination. And to your narrower audience who are in the legal field, of course, the ruling of the ICJ on the wall,
Yes.
and the settlements. It's a huge ruling that contains so many details with regard to the effort of stopping this cancer from spreading further, which is settlements, in addition to dismantling this separation wall, which is entrenching ideas of apartheid, or not ideas, but even creating a culture of apartheid vis-a-vis the Palestinian people in the occupied territory. For those who are in the legal profession, I think that creative ideas, analyzing all these results, suggesting new ideas of moving deeper in the legal field, of combating occupation and supporting the independence of the Palestinian people is needed, and we invite as many as possible who are interested in this field really to share with us the results of their work and their expertise. And I thank you very much for this.
I'd like to thank the ambassador for joining us today, and shukriya, and long live Palestine, and I hope that we see some progress being made soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you very much.